Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Lucy, if no one's ever met me before. Nice to meet you. I'm the project director for the PERL Skeletal Health study. I think we're just waiting for Andy to join, and I'll just give him a few more minutes. Thanks. Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Hey, everybody. Sorry a few minutes late.
It's okay.
Okay. So let me get set up here. Okay, are people seeing the slides or the presenter mode?
I'm seeing presenter mode.
That better?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so Lucy, everybody's on? That was supposed to be on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so just quickly, it'd be nice to introduce everybody that's on, so you can tell me who you are. And I think Lucy sent around the list of people that are expected to be today, but I just want to make sure we all at least have each other's names. So I'll start first. I'm Andy Burkhardt. I'm at in the radiology department at the University of California, San Francisco. I run what is called the HRpQCT Evaluation Center. So this is a center that is running a number of multi-center studies, primarily NIH-sponsored studies for things like Mr. Oss, EDIC, which is kind of a sister study to PERL in this case, and a couple others. We basically have a set up workflow to receive and do QA and combining of data sets from a number of different scanners and cross calibration and so forth. So we're going to be responsible for doing that for PERL. I think we have about 6 or so sites that are participating in this study. Anyways, I'll be your point person for any questions related to the HRpQCT acquisition or troubles you're having with your scanner that shouldn't be directed at Scanco. I have a colleague that works with me, Aldrich, who you may or may not interact with. He's the one that does the kind of day-to-day QA of the images and processing through our workflow here. Aldrich Chow. So with that in mind, maybe Lucy can go next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lucy Bloom, the project director for the PERL Skeletal Health Study. I'm your contact for anything study related, so please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions.
And I'll send these slides around, but I've also included Lucy's email address. You probably already have it, but just so you also have it doubly there. Okay, so maybe if any of the other centers want to go around and say who they are.
I think I go ahead and delete this. So first off is, do we have anyone from Albert Einstein? There was no one on today's call that should be on, but I just want to confirm that there's no one on Albert Einstein. Okay, and then from BC Diabetes, we have Dan Lu. Dan, I know you're not from BC Diabetes, but that's just kind of the site we have you affiliated with. So.
Hi, Dan.
And then from Jocelyn, Massachusetts General Hospital, we have Maggie Garahan. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Is there anyone else from the call?
Hi, my name is Gayatri. I am from UT Southwestern Medical Center. I'm the study coordinator for the PERL Skeletal.
Okay. And then from Calgary, we have Ann Cook and Stephanie Kwok.
Yes, hi.
And then,
Hi.
And then from Washington University, I think I have Amanda Dunn on the line. Amanda, I'm not sure if anyone else from your group is on the call. I thought I saw it earlier. Okay. And then anyone else I may have missed? Okay, I think we're good, Andy.
Okay, great. So yeah, feel free to turn off your camera if you're comfortable that way. Okay, so this particular set of slides, we have a couple of slides to go through. We'll also take a quick look at the protocol document. And just to note, we haven't sent that out yet. We'll send it out shortly. We need to update it with some of the tracking form information and a few other PERL specific things. So look for that pretty soon. We'll send it out. We'll probably send a link to it because usually those are bigger files and they don't always aren't always passed by mail servers. So we're going to cover basically the specifics of the training itself for conducting these exams. So this is really specific to the operators that are going to be running the scanner, although I don't know if we have anybody that's just supervising or facilitating on the clinic side or the imaging center side. I guess it would be useful to have an overview of that, but this is really geared towards the people that are running the scanner. I don't know why it's not going forward. Okay. So we have a process, and we do this for all of our multi-center studies of operator certification. That's to kind of harmonize the procedures that operators are following at the different clinics that are involved in our multi-center studies. And so we recognize that different centers may have slight differences in how they perform their scans, whether it be the positioning or the patient coaching or how they do a number of different things. The purpose of this is to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how we're performing these scans so that we have reliable data when we combine it from all of the different centers. The first part of that is, of course, to read a protocol, the specific protocol for PERL. This follows some specific study-specific procedures that aren't necessarily reflected in SCANCO's standard protocol that's included with their manual. So it's important that you read through this whole document and read through the whole protocol document so that you understand the specific differences that we have and needs for our particular study. The second part of the operator certification process is to do the Zoom protocol training. This is what we're doing right now. So we're kind of doing an overview of the exam procedures and specific protocols. We'll go through the document itself, the protocol document itself. So this is the opportunity to ask any questions about what we're doing. We can, of course, have follow-ups on that if anybody needs any more intensive kind of review of any procedures that aren't familiar to them. But this is the main kind of face-to-face training that we're going to have for the study. There's a virtual training aspect of this too. We have an online, and some of you may have looked at this before, an online training platform for scan positioning. We've found that although individual experienced operators may be highly reliable themselves in positioning the reference lines for the scans and may be very precise, the accuracy across operators, and particularly across different institutions, can be rather broad. Everybody has maybe subtly different has been trained in very subtle different ways for what radiographic features in the scout scan to look for to position the reference line. The good news is that for this particular protocol, we're using, I think, landmarks that are more obvious and a little bit easy to agree on. And notably, we're not using the standard SCANCO anatomic landmark for the radius scan, which is pretty subjective. That said, we still go through a positioning training procedure. We found that that reduces inter-operator variability in positioning quite dramatically. So we go through that just to kind of calibrate your eye so that all of our operators are hopefully pretty accurate in positioning the reference line where we want it to be for consistency across centers. So that's something that you'll go through, and that's just over a web browser. And then the last part of the piece is to submit certification scans. For all practical purposes, this is going to be basically the first pro participants that you see for the study. We'll review those quite carefully. And when we agree that, you've had, accomplished 5 acceptable scans, you'll officially be certified. We'll get back into this in a little more detail later. Oops. Okay, so we're moving forward with the Zoom protocol training. So our study for PERL, we have 3 different scans that we're requiring. In the lower leg, we're requiring 2 scans. We typically, at least at UCSF in radiology, we usually start with the leg just because it provides kind of a, first of all, they just don't move the, participants typically don't move the leg as much as they do the forearm. And that provides a little bit of a training before they get to the forearm scan, which is more difficult to maintain the position and be still during the scan acquisition. So we typically start with the tibia. In the lower leg, we're doing 2 scans for this study. And before I move on to that, I want to just say that this does not apply to UBC because you guys, I think, are our only site with the HRpQCT 1. And so you guys don't really have the ability to do this 30% scan site in the diaphysis. And there'll be a few other differences for the HRpQCT 1 DEME. If you have any particular questions, I'll try to point them out, but if you have any particular questions, please chime in and let me know. So anyways, we're doing a distal tibia scan that is going to be centered at 7.3%. This is our distal offset that is on average the same location as SCANCO's historical fixed offset position. And then we'll do a diaphyseal scan at 30%. This allows us to capture a solid cortical bone location, as well as steady muscle and fat and so forth in the lower leg. So these are our two positions in the leg. And then we're doing just the standard forearm, distal forearm scan. Again, this is going to be a relative offset at 4%. And notably, the offset is with respect to the proximal margin of the end plate, not the notch of the hump or whatever you're used to calling it. This is a much more reliable anatomic feature to identify, much more precise, and it's going to be much more comparable across operators. So this is a notable difference between what Scanco has typically done and what some of you may be used to doing in your forearm scans. And I'll just jump back to say that we're not using a different anatomic landmark for the tibia scan. We're doing the top of the tibial plafond, and this is very reliable and easy to reproduce across operators. Okay, so the 3 scans, scan sites. There's a couple of different site setup steps that we have to go through to get you ready for doing and seeing PERL participants. The first thing is to install and configure our data transfer pipeline, if this is an option for doing data transfers. So for most of our UC eval sites, clinics that have contributed scans to our multi-center studies, this has been the option for transferring data to us. Basically, it involves installing a script on your workstation and a task in your evaluation software. The process of transferring is basically selecting the scans in the eval software like you were doing a standard evaluation. But instead of a standard evaluation, you're selecting a task that is going to be called UC eval data transfer. That is going to do everything in the background. It automatically has credentials set up for sending data to our scanner. So sometimes that involves some interaction with IT to make sure that we can have that data transfer work. Historically, outbound, and it uses SCP, SSH, SFTP, whatever you want to call it. Historically, that hasn't been a problem. That is usually something that most computers on an institutional network were allowed to do outbound connections to servers. It's becoming increasingly difficult with kind of more stricter security policies and firewall policies that tend to lock down even these secure protocols for outbound connections. So that may be something we have to work with to put in a request on your side to allow SSH, SCP, SFTP outbound traffic connections. That's usually less onersome or less, you typically will get less resistance for that as opposed to inbound SSH connections. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be able to connect to your machine. We only want your machine to be able to connect to our file server to be able to send files. So anyways, there'll be a step to do this. We'll be working with you guys and initiating those discussions to get this installed and I can either do that. I can often do it remotely over Zoom. If there's no one available that feels comfortable doing some of the steps required for this, or you guys can do it yourself. We can talk about that on a site-by-site basis, but it's not a big process to install and configure these scripts. Okay, and then we need to make sure that your site has the specific control files for PERL. If you've worked with a UC eval study before that's coordinated at UCSF, then you probably already have these installed. You may have them installed already anyways because you're already doing these standard 4% and 7.3% offset scans, as well as the 30% offset scan in the tibia. So we'll be also coordinating the control file validation. And then the last thing is, if you haven't already done this so that you can collect diaphyseal scans in the tibia, for extreme CT users, we do need to make a minor modification to the arm cast. And not the arm cast, the leg cast. I need to take out arm here for compatibility with these scans. We basically getting to 30% with the standard leg cast is a little bit of a stretch, especially in taller individuals. And in some cases, the metal bars will overlap with the scan location. And so we need to shift those back. And so that's what's shown here. Basically, there's two positions for these fixation devices to sit on the back of this cast. And there's a simple Allen wrench, I think 3 bolts or whatever, screws that you can undo and shift it to the more proximal position on this cast. It's a relatively simple thing to do. It's really simple to undo too, if for whatever reason you need to move it back to the forward position. And all this does is, first of all, it gets the leg a little bit further into the scanner. And then it also gets the metal hopefully out of most participants' 30% location. And just seeing that there's a question in the chat. Laterality. So Gayatri's asked about left leg or right leg. It's documented in the protocol, but what I'll tell you is that we typically do the non-dominant side. So most, as I think the recent guidelines that were published, most studies are going to collect the non-dominant side, and that should be determined independently for the arm and for the leg. Unless there's an exception to that, and the exceptions would be in case of prior fracture, ankle fracture, any metal implants that would be colocalized with the scan region of view of the lower leg. And so sorry, her further follow-up question was about the cast. I think the leg cast is there is just one cast, and it is used for both right and left legs. So I don't think there's a difference in the laterality for the cast. The forearms, of course, have different stuff. For Extreme CT2 have a left and a right forearm cast, but the leg you can use interchangeably for both sides.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. Again, this is Gayatri. Because like when we got trained from our doctor, when we went to see the machine and the cast, he told us you need 2 casts, like right and leg, and he showed us only the right one. This is only for the right one. So it's not like that, because even the cast has an label saying that it's a right leg, R for right.
Oh, well, so that's funny. I think maybe perhaps I mean, they're really symmetric, along the leg axis. So I'm not sure why he would have said that, unless there was some kind of, he made some aftermarket modification of that cast for laterality. But generally the leg casts are, you use them interchange. You use the single leg cast that comes with the scanner for either side.
Okay.
But they do definitely provide by default left and a right forearm cast, and those are typically labeled, although it's also obvious. So I'm not sure. You can maybe, if you follow up by email with, this is Dr. Towler that showed it to you.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe if you want to follow up by email with him to see what the rationale for that was, is this something that he changed or what? That'd be useful to know. But generally, you can use the same cast for both left and right legs. And again, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the protocol, when you said like the protocol says non-dominant, I mean, if you ask a patient or something, he may not know. So in that case, like, can I use any leg?
If they don't have a preferred side, like, I mean, typically we just ask what foot do you kick a ball with, for example.
Yeah, okay.
Or do you prefer to kick a ball with? And that usually can, most patients can answer that question. If they don't have a preferred side, then I would probably go with the left. I don't think that's written explicitly in the form, or you could follow the same side that they are in terms of their arm.
Okay, yeah.
I think that would be fine.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, so that's the leg cast modification. As I said, there's not too many scenarios where you need it to be more proximal, but the one I can think of, and this may particularly apply to, we have WashU people on, I forget. Are they all off this one?
Yes, no one from WashU is on.
Okay, so, well, the one application where this might apply is a really extremely short stature patient population, like an osteogenesis imperfecta cohort or whatever. I know, there was a large OI trial that there were a lot of sites involved with. And some of those patients have very, very short appendages. So it might be easier for them if that mounting fixture is in the forward position, so they don't have to get in so far into the scanner. And Dan May, yes, I think the hand that they ride with is what we usually go with. If you think that's not accurate for your population, please chime in and let me know what you guys usually use. We usually ask what arm they write with, though. And yeah, it may be that some populations that's not as reliable in terms of dominance, but that's what we usually use. So okay, use that. And this is I think documented in the protocol document that you'll get. So I want to jump to that really quickly, and let me switch to the protocol. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so this is the manual that you're going to get. There's still some changes to make in this, and notably, especially the form, the kind of tracking form data that you'll use to fill out. This highlights, and I'd like each of the operators to go through this as a requirement of your training. Basically, this gives an overview, a slide overview of the study, definition of the responsibilities for each of the sites, and also for us at the coordinating center. And so you can read through each of these. And what I want to talk about first is, again, a little bit more detail about the training and certification for operators. So the first thing is, again, these are the 5 requirements that we have for operators, that they read that they have read sometime in the past, the Scanco manual for the particular, the manual that came with your scanner at some point. And then also, of course, this specific SOP for PERL, that you've completed in-person operational training with the scanner, at the scanner, preferably by a Scanco person, Doris or Nicola or whoever has done it in the past, or by the local principal operator, and we'll kind of define who that is for PERL. Then you need to successfully complete the online training session with the eval center. That's what we're doing right now over Zoom. We need you to complete the positioning training using our web-based platform for that. And this is the link for that here. And then for the radius in particular, we want to make sure that you're training and being certified with the proximal margin landmark. So this is not the Scanco landmark. This is the proximal margin of the radial head. And then a satisfactory review of each operator's initial scans by us at the coordinating center. And what we do want is that each site has identified a principal operator that would be the first person to receive certification to perform scans. And they would subsequently be responsible for monitoring and facilitating certification of additional operators if that's necessary for your particular site. So basically, for the principal operator, we expect that they'd complete the first 4 steps, and at that point they'd be considered in a probationary period of certification. They can start doing scans of PERL participants at that point. And then once they've had 5 successful scans that we've reviewed, they are considered fully certified to perform PERL participant scans. And at that point, to certify the certification of additional probational operators. So additional operators, again, they would have to complete the first 4 steps to be considered probationary. At that point, during their probationary period, they can do scans of PERL participants under the direct supervision of a certified operator, so in person, ideally. and then once their 5 scans during their probationary period have been identified as successful or acceptable, they would be considered fully certified. It would still be the role of the principal operator to supervise that certification step for any new additional operators at that point. Okay, so we talked about changing the fixation device configuration, in particular the posts. REDCap. So REDCap is going to be basically the form. This is a placeholder for a different platform that we've used for other studies, Medrio. But basically, REDCap is going to be the online form for completing all study visit data, recording and so forth. So that's going to be things like, the Scanco patient number, measurement numbers, image qualities, QC1 scans that you performed for that day, basically the lateralities that you've selected, limb lengths. We haven't talked about limb lengths yet, but limb lengths and so forth. So all of the essential information for completing the study visit, the HRpQCT part of the study visit. My preference is that you do this in person. You do this directly into the REDCap form from a computer that's next to your scanner, or a laptop, or a pad, or so forth, all of which you can access these forms through, as opposed to writing it down and then transcribing it later. That said, I know a lot of people aren't able to do that, don't like to do that, or so forth. It would be my preference that you do it that way, that there's not, an additional step with transcription error potential. We do this either with a laptop or an iPad, or if you have a reconstruction Windows workstation, Scanco workstation, that's in the same room or next to the scanner, that's a convenient place to do this particular data entry. So the exam procedures, some of it is pretty obvious. Power on the scanner, perform your QC1 scans, and if needed, QC2 scans if it's your particular day for that. Do the evaluation of your QC scans, verify that your values are in range. What is important is that the QC1 scans always have to be performed, and DEME, this is specific for the HRpQCT2, but the QC1 phantom needs to be mounted with the internal hitch coupler on the first position of the rail. Whereas, especially for the 30% scans, we need to move that hitch coupler back to the 3rd position. So after you've done the QC, first of all, the QC1 scan, of course, you have to make sure that the hitch coupler is located on the 1st position of the rail. And then after that QC scan has been done, you move it to the 3rd position of the rail to do your forearm and leg scan. And we basically need that so that we can get those 30% locations. Okay, explain the exam procedure to the subject. This is standard stuff for, I guess, most of your sites. I've provided some guidelines in this for how we talk to our patients or our research subjects. You can mix that with what you do on site, is fine with me, but we want to make sure that you have at least some guidance from us on that. We do the tibia scans first, put them in the cast, pre-calibrate and so forth. I know the pre-calibrations on the HRpQCT2 retire or expire relatively quickly. You can do, if you work smoothly and have good image quality on your first scan, you can do both the distal and the diaphyseal scan within one pre-calibration period. If not, of course, then you'll have to take it out in between and so forth. But that's acceptable to do. So basically, if you do your distal tibia scan, image quality is great, move on to the diaphyseal scan without doing a new pre-calibration. That's fine. And often you can do it, not always. If you have to repeat for image quality, then obviously you may get to the point where you have to repeat that pull them out of the scare, repeat the pre-calibration and move forward. So again, we do the forearm scan second typically, and that's the way we've documented it into the protocol. It's also the way that the REDCap form works. And one thing we've tried to set up with the form is that the form itself follows the workflow of the exam. And so that you're filling out every step in the way that you're actually performing it with the participant. it's both kind of a guide to how to do the scan, to follow the protocol, as well as data entry and capturing data that we need to do all of the QA and analysis and so forth. So that's why I like to have you fill that out in real time, because I think it helps you follow the specific steps. What I didn't include in here, which I need to update because this was pulled over from Mr. Oss, is that you do also need to, before you start scanning, you do also need to perform limb length measurements. That's required to do the relative offset scans. So that's something that I actually need to enter up in here between 0.5 and 0.6 and so forth. Okay, I'm going to skip through this part. Part of this is not, obvious. Operator, we are going to have either PERL specific IDs or some kind of ID that it can be the ID that you already use on your scanner, a number or whatever. But we want to make sure we're tracking who's doing the individual scans. We of course need this for certification. For Mr. Oss, we had specific IDs for individuals that were doing the scanning. I think what we'll end up doing is just having the number that you use to enter your operator on the scanner itself is sufficient, or initials or something like that. It just needs to be something unique so that we know, one operator at your site from the other. This is going to be updated for PERL. QC scans, that's basically the standard protocol that Scanco recommends. We want to make sure that your scans are, that your scanner is performing stable, in a stable way. So we do want to make sure that you are checking those values, confirming that they're in the reference range within tolerance of your reference values, and reporting to us if they're not. As Scanco, I think Scanco's recommendation is to repeat any scans that fall out of that reference range, a couple times to see if they're returning or not. So we would assume that you'll follow those particular procedures that Scanco recommends for that. If you do not get stable QC values, our typical recommendation is that you don't actually do the patient scan and that you contact Scanco and let us know that that's happening. And Scanco can advise about whether there's something going on or there's some problem. One problem with the Extreme CT2 in particular that people run into is the phantom not being seated correctly in the hitch couplers. And so what that does is shift the phantom a little bit out of the standard position, and then your default regions of interest, which are fixed positions in the scanner coordinate system, don't align perfectly with the BMD cylinders. And so you get values that are off. So always, definitely, if you're getting values that are off, check those VOIs, check the VOI that loads up before you do the QC1, and make sure that it's sitting centrally within your within that cylinder. Okay, so these are the recommendations, and sorry, there's some residual language from Mr. Oss. I'll put in the language about selecting the laterality here in terms of selecting non-dominance, but of course, the scenarios for not doing a non-dominant scan are if the non-dominant leg or arm had a history of fracture, or some other abnormality, if they had any metal that was in the region of the scan, and so forth. So kind of, I think those are pretty standard in terms of what sites do. So it's okay to get the dominant side if that's the case. So this part is all pretty standard in terms of picking the identifiers. We will have, what I haven't included in here yet is the way that we want you to label your participants in Scanco's database. We'll have a kind of a standard formatting for doing that. So that'll be specified in here when this is updated. Patient coaching, this is all kind of our recommendation for how to do it. This, some of this will be similar to what you do locally. Some of it may be new, and you may have other things that you do that are great too. So I'll let you review these and you can see what suits you. Okay, scanning. As I said, the thing that you're going to need to do for these scans, because we're doing relative offsets, is to measure their forearm length and limb length. We have a standard tool for doing that. It's a metal tape measure. If you've been to a site with us before, you probably already have this. If you don't have this, we're going to send it to you. It's not an expensive item, you know, it costs $10 or something like that, but it's what we've used for all of our other studies. It's what I think Inhane's used for most of their anthropometry. So it's a kind of a standard tool for doing those measurements. Notably, we don't use the big calipers ones for this for a number of reasons. So limb length is really the first thing you need to do, and we'll talk about that particular procedure. I think it's also documented in here, so you can review that. And the setup and acquisition and so forth is pretty standard in terms of the you know, doing a scout view and all that kind of stuff. We talk about some of the things that we like in our scout scans to have reliable positioning. We want to make sure you have good coverage of the length of the VOI, in particular to make sure that you have a good sight of both where the reference line will go and where the scan region will go. So that's particularly important in the diaphyseal tibia scan because it's a pretty long offset, and we want to make sure and be able to see that the scan region is not overlapping with metal when you position the reference line according to protocol. Okay, so we'll go through the setup and acquisition. What I want to do is punch out back to the slides really quick to touch on the scan positioning. Make sure I got the right power. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the distal tibia, this is pretty straightforward. This is pretty much what everybody's doing anyways, and what Scanco has recommended from the beginning. And that is that we're placing the reference line to intersect the apex of the tibial plafon. So the key radiographic feature that you see in the scout scan is a sharp, bright edge that delineates high intensity subchondral bone from low intensity dark joint space. And so if you imagine that boundary that separates those two locations in the scout scan, a line that traces that intersection, that boundary, the distal most point on that line is where we want to intersect our reference line. That's pretty straightforward. And I think everybody's been using that. That's pretty reliable across operators. I think there had been at some point some sites that were being trained or had been trained by somebody at Scanco or somewhere, I don't know, to position that reference line in the middle of the joint space, in the dark space, as opposed to the basically intersection of the subchondral bone in the joint space. And that definitely, you know, leads to a shift in the scan location. So it is important to document this and make sure that we're all following the same thing. Again, that line is tracing the basically that boundary between bright and dark. And okay, the distal radius, sorry, I have the wrong one in here. I need to change that. I forgot to swap out this part. Okay, let's talk about this. This is going to be the anatomy that we use for both, for the distal radius scan. We're only doing a distal radius scan for this protocol. So, and the analogy that we use is the skier as opposed to the hiker, which we've used for other things. And give me 1 second. I just gotta respond to something really quick. Okay. So the sorry if you can hear some bells ringing in the background. We got a puppy and I think it wants some attention, so she's otherwise quiet. Anyways, the skier is our analogy for the placement of the reference line for the distal radius. If you can imagine, again, the line, the edge that delineates the bright subchondral bone from the dark joint space. And if you trace that line from the distal most point of the radial head to the proximal most point of the radial head, and imagine a skier sliding down that particular hill, the trajectory that the skier follows, that curve flying off the end, which is the proximal most edge of that surface, that's where we want the reference line to intersect. And so we would be scanning at a 4%, centered at a 4% offset from that particular location. That's the distal radius. Okay, and we'll get back to the protocol. Sorry, I just saw a chat question, I think. Thanks, Emma. Okay, let's see, back to the protocol. Let's share. Okay, so some guidelines about those scout scans. Again, we just want to make sure that the scan region is covered. You can see in the tibia, in this case, when that 30% location is outside of the scan field of view, that is something we want to try to avoid, because some of those proximal most slices may overlap with metal in people with long limbs. And that is something we want to try to avoid. So there's some particular notes about those cases for the 30% scan, people with really long limbs. And this can apply to people starting at around 400 millimeters, but really is the case when you start getting individuals with tibial lengths around 420 or more millimeters. And so the key thing for that is, when you recognize that you're dealing with a long-limbed individual, is to completely remove the foot pad in the leg cast and make sure that you have the heel of their foot really all the way down against the wall of the bottom of the foot cast. So that's really going to be the most important part. It is possible sometimes during the positioning process that their foot will pull out a little bit. And so you want to make sure, even once they're kind of in their final position, that they've really secured their foot, their heel, all the way against the end of the cast. So that said, you might run into some people that they're just too long. And it hopefully is not happening too often, but if you get an individual with a 450 millimeter tibial length, you're just probably not going to get that 30% scan. And if that's the case, after you've done the scout scan, you see that the VOI is overlapping with the metal, then you just have to move on, and it's not worth actually doing that scan. Okay, so again, if you do in the meantime have an intermediate sized person, you do the scan, you see that they're the scout scan, you see that the VOI is going to overlap partially with that metal rod. What I do is try to improve the positioning a little bit, make sure their heel is really all the way at the end. And then if you're still not able to get that 30% location outside of the outside of being coplanar with that metal, then you have to move on and skip. Hi, puppy. Sorry, she's jumping up and barking at me right now. Okay, we got about 10 more minutes. Let's see. Okay, so we've talked about the radius and the unique positioning for that. Okay, data management. So I mentioned this again. This is gonna be part of the site setup to install our data transfer pipeline for sending data over the internet to the UC Eval Center. Basically, this sends raw data and IMA data. And what we request is that first of all, of course, you have to wait until you can confirm that the reconstructions have finished. We need to make sure that we're getting IMA data that is complete in terms of image reconstruction. But once that's done, then you can perform your data transfer. So what we would like, especially in the certification phase, is that you initiate those data transfers within 24 hours following the scan. Typically, unless you're doing a lot of specimen, high resolution specimen scans, the recons should finish, sometime within a couple of hours at least. So usually that's not a onerous task to request within 24 hours. We also request, in addition to all of the patient scans that you've acquired, we also want the corresponding QC1 scans for that day. So we don't need every day that you do a QC1 scan, because you're not going to see a PERL participant every day. But every day that you do have a PERL participant, we want a QC1 daily scan. You don't need individual QC1 scans for each patient. So if you do happen to have multiple PERL participants on the same day, one QC1 scan for that day is, of course, all we really need.
Andrew, just a quick
Yeah.
question. I just
Yeah.
want to confirm something here. So the internet transfer, the data transfer means the scans transfer to the UCSF is
Correct.
UCEVAP, right? So
Correct.
is this the reason that you mentioned about installing 2 softwares on our computer downstairs? I mean, like to transfer the scans? Is this the
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of components to doing this, getting it set up. But yeah, that's what we're going to want to do on your scanner. In addition to the data transfer, we also have to make sure you have the control files, like the scan protocol, installed on your scanner. But that's a separate thing. But yeah, this data transfer pipeline involves installation and configuration of our scripts that allow your workstation, your scanner workstation, to do that data transfer.
Do we have any other option to send these scans besides installing the software?
Yeah, if that's not going to work, then for whatever reason, then we can fall back on sending tapes. That I think is yeah, I mean, it'd be my preference to receive them on our file server over the network. If that's not going to work for whatever reason, and we've had a few sites that just can't do that. One site, their hospital is required that their scanner be completely air gapped, not connected to any network, no matter what, much less
Probably we might face the same issue. So that's
Okay.
the reason I'm asking. Like,
Yeah, so we can see about that. Like I said, I think a lot of sites have started to be more strict about having network routines available only as needed, and they shut everything down, and then you can put in a request to say, we need this particular protocol for connecting to this particular external server open for us for this reason. And a lot of places are willing to do that. Some are gonna, everybody's IT, local IT policies are different, but I think for the most part, we've been able to do that. There's been a few exceptions. So it's something we can work through and talk about, individually, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyways, it's my preferred way. Then we have, but that said, if we, because we can get those scans then immediately. If that's not an option, then we can do tapes, and we'll, do those in batches as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so again, you need to wait, of course, for the reconstruction jobs to finish. There's there's ideas about how you can determine that. Okay, so this basically gives the overview of how to do that in your evaluation software. It's basically loading up each individual scan that you've acquired for PERL. And loading, right here, it's written as Mr. Oz data transfer. It's going to be UC eval data transfer. She just saw my wife, so she went crazy. UC eval data transfer and doing start evaluation. And so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything else other than just start evaluation once you've selected that particular task.
But I'm also happy to set a meeting.
You'll see it running in your queue. We'd like to have all of your scans. I know that you're gonna repeat scans for motion. We'd like to see all of the scans that you acquire, and we'll make the decision about which ones to include, which ones not to. And then so as Gayatri alluded to, there's of course a backup option, and that's a tape transfer. And everybody knows how to use those tapes. We've provided the specific guidelines to use tapes to send the scans for PERL. And here it's documented here. So you can follow that. If you end up ultimately are a site that ends up sending us scans by tape, this is going to be the procedure that you can follow.
Sure.
And again, it's important that for sending us scans that you only do copy to tape, not move to tape. We don't want kind of your final copy of these scans. We want you to archive scans according to your normal archiving routines locally so that you have a backup copy of that. We just want a copy. And then these are the procedures. These are kind of typical ScanCo procedures for local archives. And again, that's going to follow a little bit of your local procedures for archiving. Every site has a different policy in terms of data retention online for their scanner. This is going to change again. This is the REDCap form is going to look different than what's here. So I'll just skip through that. And then this is the limb length measurement. So let's see, we have about 5 minutes to cover this part of it. So you have to measure forearm length and lower leg length for our scans. And that's something that you're going to happen at the beginning of the study before you start putting casts on and stuff like that. For the forearm, what we're actually measuring is ulnar length. Not actual radial length, and that's because it's just much easier to measure the length of the ulna itself as opposed to the radius. And the process that we use, and this is what we recommend, and I'll note that this is not a steel tape measure. This is not the one that you're going to use. The one that you actually will use is identified here, Lufkin, this Lufkin millimeter tape measure. And what's important is that you're recording the units of this length in millimeter. So it should be, typically it's going to be somewhere between 200 and 450 or so millimeters for the radius and for the tibia. So not in centimeters, in millimeters. And these have to be entered into the scanner when you do the scan. And that's part of the, at the time you're doing the scout scan, you will enter in the limb lengths into the scout scan window. Okay, so for forearm lengths, first of all, you can, what we like to do is position the patient so that their elbow rests on a flat surface and that they hold up their hand vertically. You can palpate for the ulnar styloid process, which is at the very end. It's basically the kind of notch you can feel in that joint. What we do is we mark that position on the skin with a pencil, or what can often work as a cosmetic pencil or something like that, that rubs off quite easily, a pen or pencil. We mark that, and then we make a vertical measurement of that mark on the skin to the surface. And what you want to do is make sure it's less of an issue for the arm, that your tape measure is straight and not contouring to the soft tissue at all. So that, different people may have different amounts of soft tissue around their arm, of course, and more so for the lower leg, but you want to make sure that it's a very straight line from your mark to the ground adjacent to your elbow. We have used a vertical plane also to assist in making sure that the arm is straight vertically. Okay, tibial length. This requires making two positions, marking two positions on the leg. Our preference is to start with, if the patient can do this, is to have them cross their ankle over their other knee. This gives you kind of nicer access to palpating and feeling the tibial plateau. And what you can see is the medial tibial plateau. You can even see the little notch of that identified in this image. It's going to be difficult to identify in everybody. So people with more amounts of soft tissue around their knee, and that may be the case for diabetics. it's more difficult to feel this location. What I want to point out is that it's not on exactly the side of the knee. It's not right in the front knee, but it's really at about 45 degrees. So a medial anterior position around that surface. And what I like to do is, if you can imagine, if you can see this, is I start towards the foot and I run my fingers up until you can kind of feel it fall over the tibial plateau, kind of that edge and into the joint space. You can also do it the same way after that and make sure you find the same location, is come proximally and slide it down until you feel that gap. Again, it's going to be difficult in people with more soft tissue, so you have to do your best to do that. And then the distal location, you can see this is the medial malleolus, and basically the end of that is the other location that you want to mark. So again, that's going to be, you'll feel that big bump, and if you with your hands, if you feel your fingers roll off as you move from the calf down to that ankle and over that bump, where it falls off of that edge is where you want to mark. And then with their foot across their ankle, you can just do a straight measurement between those two positions. And again, with people with larger legs, you want to try to make sure that it's a straight measurement and it's not curving over the surface of their leg. Does anybody have any questions about that? If they're not able to have this sit in this particular position with their ankle crossed over their knee, you can have them cross over their other ankle. That makes things pretty easy. And of course, if they can't do that either, if they have knee pain or whatever, you can just have, their leg vertical. And this is kind of I'd say the most difficult position to be able to palpate that, the tibial plateau, especially for more obese people with greater amounts of soft tissue. But, of course, you have to accommodate patients' comfort. Okay, so that's the positioning. What I typically do is we'll do 3 independent measurements of that. Wash away the marker for each of those things and then take the average of that measurement. Does anybody have any questions about the limb length measurement? If you've done these a lot before already, for whatever reason, then you kind of probably know what you're going to be doing. If you haven't done these measurements before, what I'd encourage you to do is find a partner that you can practice on, and just practice feeling those, palpating those positions, and making the measurement. I think it'll go smoother once you get a participant in the chair. Okay, we're a couple minutes over time. Let me just switch back to the slides. Those are pretty much almost done anyways. Okay, so we talked about this. So then the step 3 of the certification training is this web app. This is the URL to this here. It's also in the protocol document. You'll go to this website and you'll complete basically the certification tasks for positioning. I think that's documented in the protocol, the specific way of doing this, what you need to do in this thing. There's basically 3 modules that you can do in this web app. There's a training, an evaluation, and a precision module. And what we want you to start with the training module, and there's a training first certification task. And then once you've completed the training for certification, to move on to the evaluation module. And that's basically how that works. And then certification scans. I think we already talked about this, this particular process in detail, so I won't repeat that. Questions. So I think you guys all have local coordinators for PERL that are doing a lot of the coordination of getting patients to your imaging centers and so forth. So they would, of course, be the local contacts for any local administrative questions or issues, or patient support issues. The UC Eval Center would be the place to contact, and me in particular, if you have any questions about the protocol or data collection or data transfer issues. And then finally, of course, if you have any scanner technical issues, your first person to contact is Scanco. We'd like to be CC'd on that, so we're just in the loop on any issues hardware issues your scanner may be having. And of course, if it's gonna impact scheduling, you should loop in your local PERL coordinators. And then finally, also please CC Lucy so that she's aware of everything. She's got her our eyes on the whole picture here, so it's good to have her in the loop. Okay, so any questions? We're past time, so if people need to go, that's fine. If people have any other questions, we can either address those now or do any kind of follow-up later.
Hi, it's Anne from the UFC. Thanks, and I might follow up with you on a couple of things later, but no questions right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Andrew, for the presentation. I just have one quick question regarding the REDCap form. Again, that should be installed on the computer to fill it at the time when the patient is there in the room.
Yeah, and REDCap is just a it's a website. So so I think Lucy will be, I think, helping set up credentials for you to be able to log into that. So it's just access through your web browser. Any computer with internet access should be able to connect to REDCap and complete those forms.
Yeah, okay, because like when we first looked at the computers in the room, it was like pretty slow computers. It took forever to get on and off and everything. So I'm not sure how much flexibility I will have in the room to set up all these things there.
Yeah, so you won't be able to do this from the Scanco VMS workstations. They have a web browser that's like 20 years old.
Okay.
It's not going to support the things that it would need to be able to enter data into REDCap. So you would need either a Windows or Mac workstation that's in that room. If you don't have that, if you bring in a laptop, that's usually pretty convenient, or an iPad or something like that. If none of those are really options, if you don't have access to a tablet or a laptop to bring into the room, then of course you can have the printed form that you fill out by hand, and then do the REDCap data entry later.
We can take the laptop into the room. So
that's our
not
preference.
sure
That's what we typically do. And again, that'd be my preference that you're entering it directly into there.
So since we are taking the laptop, is there any option like transferring the scans from the Scanco machine into our laptop so it's easy for us to send it? We can install whatever you said about for sending the scans, we can install on our computer. That's easy for us rather than the Scanco machines.
So yeah, I mean, the only thing you can do that in theory. It just means an extra step of transferring data from the scanner to your laptop, and then from the laptop to your thing. And what we'd prefer, and the furthermore is that the laptop is kind of tied to you personally, and the scanner is just tied to that the scanner workstation tied to that scanner. It's always going to be that workstation that's running that scanner. So it just would be a lot more convenient, I think. And honestly, I think it'd be less work for you. If we get we're going to have to go through the same setup in terms of security to make sure that that workstation can talk to our file server as we would from a laptop on your network to talk to our file server. So that it's not different in terms of the site setup, getting that ready to go. And it's one less step. I mean, you still have to do a data transfer to your laptop that is often not so convenient to do from VMS to a different platform.
The only reason I'm concerned about, because that computer in the Scanco at our institution belongs to one particular doctor, so it's not our UT. So I don't know how much flexibility we have in installing all this on his Scanco operating system.
Sure. So yeah, and we can talk about that offline with Dr. Tyler. And I think that he'll be open to that, but we'll see. We'll
I will catch up with you later, like follow up on this. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks, Gayatri. Okay. Any more questions? Anybody? Hold on, I think Demi's got a question, maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Demi. And again, maybe I'll touch base with you offline about XCT1 specific things. I know you guys have a lot of experience doing relative offsets on your XCT1 without, the software updates that allow that. But I'll talk to you directly about that.
I just have a quick question. Is there a timeline for completing reading through the protocol and doing the training through your
thanks for asking that. I mean, I guess just before you start seeing patients, I mean, there's probably a timeline that the clinics are looking at to recruit and start sending patients over to you. So before that, I don't need it to be immediate, but and frankly, it's better for the other parts of the training to be a little bit closer to the time that you're actually looking at, for example, those scout scans and how to position them and so forth, or doing the other PERL specific parts of the protocol. So if you're not expecting to see participants for a couple months, I wouldn't necessarily jump on all of those tasks right now. So I think that's worth talking to your local coordinator to see what their time frame is for getting participants to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I think the manual should be coming to you guys pretty soon. Please review that. If you have any questions about it, just follow up by email. It might be worth having an email thread with all of the operators, or at least the principal operators, looped in so that common questions can be addressed as a group. So maybe we can do it that way, is to set up a message thread for that. Anything else, Lucy, on your side? Anything else?
No.
Okay.
I'm actually recording this session, and I'll probably post it on either YouTube or something like that, so then you have access to this video when you need to.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to starting to see scans come in sometime soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.